Someone get this man out of my conference room before he infects the donors. Dr. Victor Hale said it with a smile. Not a loud smile, not a nervous one. The kind a man wears when he knows every person in the room depends on him too much to correct him. The homeless man stood near the back wall of St. Agnes Medical Center in Portland, Oregon, soaked from the November rain, one hand wrapped around a dented silver harmonica on a shoelace. His coat smelled like alley smoke and wet cardboard. His beard had gone gray in patches. A security guard had one hand hovering near his elbow, waiting for permission to drag him out. Across the polished floor, residents in white coats whispered behind their programs. One of them, a young man with perfect hair and a coffee stain on his cuff, laughed first. "I'm sorry," he said, loud enough for the donors to hear. "Is he here for the charity ward tour, or is he claiming he diagnosed the patient too?" A few people chuckled. The man did not answer. At the front of the room, a 12-year-old girl named Lily sat in a wheelchair beside her mother. A blue hospital blanket covered her knees. Her left hand rested over the side of her neck, where the skin was swollen from the procedure that had nearly killed her 2 days earlier. She had stopped smiling 10 minutes before. The donor event was supposed to celebrate Dr. Hale's miracle pathway, a surgical technique he claimed would bring national attention and millions in funding to St. Agnes. Cameras were lined along the side wall. A city health official sat in the second row. So did hospital trustees, news interns, wealthy families, and 3 residents who had built their careers around repeating Hale's name like a prayer. And now one soaked, nameless man had ruined the rhythm of the show by saying 5 quiet words. "That incision is too low." That was all. No accusation, no drama, just a sentence from a man everyone had already decided did not belong indoors. Dr. Hale had paused for half a second. Then the old confidence returned to his face. "You heard him," Hale said, lifting the microphone again. "Our friend here has diagnosed a surgical complication from the snack table." The resident with the coffee stain laughed harder. The homeless man's hand tightened around the harmonica. Lily's mother, Mara, rose halfway from her chair. "He was right about the fever," she said. "He told the nurse last night." Hale's smile thinned. "Mara?" he said softly, the way powerful men say a name when they are warning you in public. "Your daughter is frightened. You are exhausted. And this man is exploiting that." The guard touched the homeless man's sleeve. That was when Hale crossed the line. He walked off the platform, took the laminated donor badge hanging from the man's neck, and held it up between 2 fingers. "Temporary visitor badge," he announced. "No medical license, no affiliation, no address, no dignity." A camera light blinked red. The old man lowered his eyes, but he did not move. Hale flicked the badge against his chest. "You want to play doctor?" he said. "Start by washing your hands." The sound that followed was small, not even a gasp. It came from Lily. The girl was staring at the old man's wrist. His sleeve had slipped when the badge hit him. Under the frayed cuff, a scar ran from the base of his palm almost to his forearm. Not the thin, random mark of a street injury. It was clean, old, deliberate, curved around the tendon line like a signature written in skin. Mara saw it too. So did one of the older nurses near the side door, whose pen stopped moving over her clipboard. The resident noticed the attention and smirked. "What?" he said. "Did he operate on himself under a bridge?" The old man finally raised his head. For one breath, the wet, tired face changed, not into anger, into something worse for Victor Hale. Recognition. The old man's voice was rough, but steady. "You shouldn't have shown that slide." Behind Dr. Hale, frozen on the giant screen, was a diagram of the miracle pathway. A line drawing of a neck. A bright red incision. 3 initials in the lower corner of an old, scanned page that no one in the room had been meant to notice. VH kept talking before anyone could ask. "Escort him out." The guard gripped the man's arm. But Lily's mother moved faster. She stood between them with both hands shaking. "No," Mara said. "If he knows something about my daughter, he stays." Hale's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Calloway, if you interfere with hospital security, your daughter's transfer can be delayed, and given her condition, I would think very carefully about that. There it was, not just cruelty, a threat, public, clean, wrapped in policy. The donors shifted in their seats. A trustee stopped pretending to read the program. The city official, Denise Harper, leaned forward with her phone in her hand. The homeless man glanced at Lily, then at the screen, then down at the harmonica hanging against his chest, a tiny object, silver, dented at the corner, useless maybe, except his thumb kept finding the same worn notch as if it remembered a life the room had erased. Hale stepped back onto the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, trying to recover the shine in his voice, "this is exactly why modern medicine requires standards. We cannot let fear, superstition, or street corner opinions undermine science." The old man gave a tired half-smile. "No," he said, "we can't." The microphone caught it. Hale heard the tone. So did the residents. So did every donor who had been enjoying the show until the homeless man stopped sounding ashamed. The room changed. Not enough to save him yet. Enough to make Victor Hale hurry. As security pulled him toward the doors, the old man's sleeve slid higher. The scar was fully visible now. And in the second row, Denise Harper whispered something into her phone that made the hospital attorney stand up. By the end of that week, the donor funding would be frozen, Doctor. Hale's name would be missing from the hospital website, and every resident who laughed would be asked under oath why they ignored a warning from the one man in Portland who had earned the right to give it. But none of them knew that yet. All they saw was a homeless man being shoved into the hallway. All they heard was his harmonica striking the marble floor. To understand why that scar mattered, and why Victor Hale feared it more than any lawsuit, you have to go back 6 weeks before the donor event. 6 weeks earlier, the man who would one day be dragged from St. Agnes Medical Center woke before sunrise behind a shuttered print shop on Southeast Grand Avenue. His name was Elias Ward. Most people on the block called him Doc, but not because they knew anything. In Portland, any man over 60 who wrapped a stranger's cut hand with clean gauze and told him to stop pouring whiskey on it could earn a nickname. Elias never corrected them. He kept his belongings in a green canvas army bag with one broken zipper, 2 shirts, a cracked pair of reading glasses, a rain poncho folded with care, a small tin of antiseptic packets collected from shelters, and the dented silver harmonica on its shoelace wrapped every night in a blue cloth. The harmonica had belonged to his wife, June. She used to play one note when he came home too late from the hospital, just one accusing little sound from the kitchen doorway. Elias would lift both hands like a man surrendering to the law, and she would try not to smile. That was before the lawsuit, before the fall, before his hands started shaking whenever he passed the east entrance of St. Agnes. He washed in the bathroom of a church basement when the doors opened at 6. He shaved when he could. He never drank, though people assumed he did. He spent his mornings near the bus stop outside the medical district, where discharged patients waited with pharmacy bags and confused faces. That was how he helped, without calling it help. A woman with a new cast had her sling adjusted. A veteran with diabetes was told to go back inside because his foot was warm and streaked red. A teenager with stitches got a quiet reminder that yes, the antibiotic mattered even if the pain was gone. Elias asked no one for money when he did these things. Sometimes people offered food, sometimes they offered a cigarette. Most offered nothing because need has a way of making gratitude feel expensive. At noon, he walked to the public library and read old medical journals until a security guard told him he smelled like weather. He never argued. He simply placed the magazine back exactly where it belonged and left. His left wrist ached in the cold. The scar there was not from an accident. It was the price of a procedure no resident at St. Agnes learned honestly anymore. Years ago, when the technique was still theory and no training model could show the risk, Elias had made the first trial on himself under controlled conditions. It was reckless by today's language, necessary by the language of the time. June had hated the scar. "You gave them your hand," she once said, tracing it with her thumb. "Don't give them the rest of you." But Elias had. He had given the hospital 27 years, 2 knees ruined by standing, a marriage stretched thin by emergency calls, and finally, his name. After June died, he had no one left to pull him away from the building that had taken more than it returned. He did not become homeless all at once. Almost nobody does. First came the suspension after a young surgeon accused him of falsifying research credit. Then the settlement he could not afford to fight. Then the condo sold to cover legal fees. Then a room at a weekly motel. Then the night manager asking for cash he did not have. By the time anyone wondered where Dr. Elias Ward had gone, the hospital directory had already been cleaned. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Elias was sitting outside St. Agnes with a paper cup of soup cooling in his hands when the first sign returned. A woman rushed past him carrying a child's backpack and a folder of discharge papers. Her hair was tied badly, the way people tie it after sleeping in a chair. A girl in a wheelchair followed, thin and pale, trying to act braver than her body allowed. The girl coughed once and pressed her fingers under her jaw. Elias heard it. Not the cough, the wet catch underneath it. He watched the mother stop near the curb and bend over the papers with the helpless anger of someone told to understand what had not been explained. "Excuse me," Elias said. The woman clutched the folder tighter before she even saw him properly. "I don't have cash. I'm not asking." She tried to move around him. The girl's eyes stayed on his harmonica. "My mom had one," she said. Her mother stiffened. "Lily." "It's all right," Elias said. He kept his hands visible. "How long since the procedure?" The woman's face changed from fear to suspicion. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows that swelling after a neck incision is worth taking seriously." That stopped her. The girl swallowed and winced. Elias nodded toward the folder. "Did they tell you to watch for fever? Trouble breathing? A voice change?" "They said discomfort was normal," the mother said. "Dr. Hale said we were lucky to be selected." At the name, Elias's cup bent in his hand. Victor Hale. He had been a resident once. Brilliant in public. Careless in private. A man who always knew where the camera was even when there was no camera. Elias kept his voice even. "If she runs a fever, you bring her back. If her breathing sounds tight, don't wait." The mother read the faded hospital logo on his old sweatshirt, then the frayed cuffs, the bag at his feet, the shoes patched with tape. "Were you a nurse?" "No." "A doctor?" He almost told the truth. Instead, he said, "A long time ago, I was useful." The answer did not satisfy her. But Lily gave a tiny smile. "What's your harmonica's name?" she asked. Elias glanced down at the silver piece against his chest. "It doesn't have one. Everything important should have a name." Her mother gave him a tired apology with her eyes, then pushed the wheelchair toward the patient pickup lane. Before they left, Elias tore the clean corner from a paper clinic flyer and wrote 4 words in careful block letters: fever, swelling, voice, breathing. He handed it to Mara Calloway. "If 2 of those happen together, insist on being seen." Mara took the paper like she did not want to need it. 3 days later, rain came hard over Portland, and Elias saw Victor Hale's face on a banner outside St. Agnes. The donor event. Advancing the miracle pathway. Under the words was Hale in a white coat smiling beside a child patient Elias did not recognize. Beneath the banner, a smaller line announced the date, November 18th, 6 weeks away. Elias stood in the rain until the ink on a free newspaper bled against his fingers. The miracle pathway. They were using his old work again. Not properly. Not carefully. Not even with his name erased cleanly. Worse than that, if the line drawing on the banner was accurate, the incision had been moved lower than the method allowed. He felt June's harmonica knock softly against his chest in the wind, but a child was different. That afternoon, Elias returned to the library and asked for help accessing the county archive terminal. The librarian wrinkled her nose but gave him a guest pass. He searched his own name for the first time in 7 years. Most of it was gone behind dead links and institutional pages that led nowhere. But one thing remained in an old scanned medical bulletin from 1998. A photograph of Elias in a surgical cap, left sleeve rolled up, wrist scar visible, standing beside the original diagram. Under it was a caption: Dr. Elias Ward demonstrates the Ward pathway after successful clinical approval. Elias printed the page for 10 cents he had to borrow from a man sleeping at the next computer. Then he folded it once, slid it inside the blue cloth with June's harmonica, and walked back into the rain with a deadline in his pocket. Inside St. Agnes, Victor Hale was not just a surgeon. He was the face on the elevator screens, the name in donor newsletters, the man trustees introduced with a hand on his shoulder, as if touching him proved they understood the future of medicine. He spoke in polished sentences about access, innovation, and children who deserved second chances. The hospital loved him because he made suffering sound fundable. His office sat on the 8th floor, overlooking the Willamette River. On one wall hung framed magazine covers. On another, photographs of him beside governors, athletes, and grateful families. None showed the old basement operating theater where the original pathway had been tested before cameras cared. Hale rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. A pause from him could make a resident rewrite a report. A smile from him could move a nurse off a rotation. A compliment from him could turn an ambitious young doctor into a loyal witness. The most loyal was Dr. Ryan Bell, third-year surgical resident, the one with careful hair and a talent for laughing exactly when Hale expected it. Ryan had grown up telling people he would leave Idaho and become important. At St. Agnes, importance had a name, and that name was Hale. So Ryan memorized his phrases, copied his posture, and treated every patient like a future anecdote in a speech. 2 weeks after Elias first saw the banner, Ryan found him under the covered walkway near patient pickup. Elias had stopped Mara Calloway again. Lily had a knitted cap pulled low over her ears. Her skin had a grayish cast now, and the swelling near her incision had not fully gone down. Mara was trying to get someone on the phone while balancing a pharmacy bag and insurance papers against her hip. "Her voice is different," Elias said. "It comes and goes," Mara whispered. "They said inflammation. Did they examine the airway? I don't know. They used words. They always use words." Elias took half a step back so she would not feel trapped. "Ask for imaging. Today." Before Mara could answer, Ryan Bell came through the sliding doors with 2 residents behind him. "Is there a problem?" Ryan asked. His badge shone. His shoes were spotless. He recognized Lily from Hale's service, then recognized Elias as part of the hospital's everyday scenery, the kind people walked around without seeing. Mara straightened. This man noticed something. He thinks Lily should be checked again. Ryan gave Elias a professional smile without warmth. "Sir, are you medically involved in this patient's care?" "No." "Then please don't frighten families outside the hospital." Elias kept his attention on Mara. "If her breathing changes, emergency department. Don't wait for permission." Ryan's smile hardened. The rule came easily to him because Hale had taught it that morning. Only authorized personnel may provide clinical guidance on hospital property. It sounded reasonable. That was why it worked. "Security has been asked to monitor solicitation near the entrances," Ryan said. "I'd hate for this to become a trespassing issue." Mara's face flushed. Shame and fear crossed it together. "He didn't ask me for anything." Ryan nodded as though she had confirmed a diagnosis. "Predatory behavior doesn't always start with money." The words landed harder than a shove. Elias put both hands into his coat pockets. One closed around the folded bulletin page. The other found June's harmonica through the fabric. He could have said Ryan's training was incomplete. He could have said the man he worshipped had stolen a method he did not fully understand. He could have said, with one sentence, that the sidewalk knew more surgical history than the residents in front of it. Instead, Elias studied Lily's breathing. Still shallow. Still controlled. Not yet an emergency. "Go in if it gets worse," he said, and walked away before security made Mara pay for defending him. Ryan watched him reach the corner. "Portland collects these guys," one resident muttered. Ryan laughed. "This one thinks he's house with a sleeping bag." The residents carried that line upstairs like a souvenir. By afternoon, Elias had a new label in the building, the homeless diagnostician. Nurses heard it. Transporters heard it. A receptionist wrote "no loitering" on a sticky note and placed it near the front desk. By the next week, Hale mentioned uncredentialed interference during a surgical conference, and every resident knew exactly whom he meant. Only one person did not laugh. Denise Harper from the City Health Office came to St. Agnes to review community benefit reports before the donor event. She was 49, direct, and known for asking small questions until large rooms became uncomfortable. At the front desk, she saw Elias outside through the glass sharing his soup with a discharged man who could not open the plastic spoon packet because of a tremor. "Is that outreach staff?" Harper asked. The receptionist glanced up. "No, just a guy who hangs around." Harper watched Elias adjust the man's wrist brace with such clean economy that her pen paused over the sign-in sheet. "Does he cause trouble?" "Doctors say he bothers patients." Harper wrote that down. Not because it proved anything, because people in power rarely called someone a bother unless that person had touched a nerve. Later that day, Hale hosted a donor walkthrough in the surgical education suite. Lily and Mara had been invited as patient family voices, though Mara had not understood that meant standing beside a poster while strangers praised a doctor she could barely reach by phone. Hale placed a gentle hand near Lily's shoulder without quite touching her. "This young lady," he told the donors, "is exactly why the donor event matters. The miracle pathway gives children options where none existed before." Lily tried to smile. Mara noticed the effort cost her. On a table nearby lay a display of historical materials, a replica instrument set, an old surgical diagram, and a laminated timeline that began with Victor Hale's fellowship year. Elias's name was nowhere. Mara, waiting while donors asked Hale questions, drifted toward the table. Something about the diagram felt familiar, not because she understood it, but because she had seen the same red line on the banner where the homeless man had stood in the rain. A small, printed corner on the diagram showed 3 initials, partly blurred by the laminate glare. E.W. Before Mara could lean closer, Ryan Bell slid the diagram into a neater position and set a brochure over the corner. "Careful," he said brightly. "Some of these archival pieces are fragile." Mara withdrew her hand. Ryan's tone said, "Patient mother, stay in your place." Across the room, Hale was answering a donor's question about risk. "The beauty of this pathway," he said, "is that it simplifies the old approach. Less complexity, less fear." Mara almost spoke. Then Lily coughed into her sleeve, and the sound had that wet catch again. Hale's eyes flicked toward her, then away. That evening, Elias returned to the shelter late and found a notice taped to his bunk. Due to city cleanup operations and event security protocols, all unsheltered individuals within 2 blocks of the medical district would be moved before November 18th. He read it twice. The deadline was no longer just the donor event. If he disappeared from the area before then, Lily might disappear into Hale's version of the truth with him. Elias sat on the edge of the bunk, unfolded the old bulletin page, and pressed his thumb against the photograph of his younger self. The scar in the picture matched the scar on his wrist. The diagram matched the one on Hale's display. But proof, he knew, was not the same as being believed. The first time Elias tried to walk through the main entrance of St. Agnes, security stopped him before the doors finished opening. "Hospital access is for patients and approved visitors," the guard said. Elias held up the printed bulletin page in its blue cloth. "I need to speak with patient advocacy." The guard studied his coat, not the paper. "You can call. I don't have a phone, then use a public one. There aren't many left." The guard's expression did not change. "That's not a hospital problem." Through the glass behind him, Elias could see the donor event banner hanging from the atrium. Victor Hale's smile had been enlarged to nearly 6 feet wide. Below it, workers arranged rows of chairs where the hospital would soon applaud itself for compassion. Elias folded the page back into the cloth. "Tell Dr. Hale that Elias Ward is asking to meet." The guard's radio crackled. He repeated the name once, then listened. His eyes moved over Elias again, slower this time. "No appointment on file," he said. "You need to leave the property." So, Hale had heard. That was useful. Elias retreated to the sidewalk and waited under a maple tree shedding yellow leaves into the gutter. He was still there an hour later when Mara pushed Lily out after another appointment. Lily's lips were pale. "They said it's anxiety," Mara told him before he asked. Her voice was low and embarrassed. "They said she's scared because I keep asking questions." Elias crouched, keeping enough distance for Mara to choose trust, not be forced into it. "Lily, can you say your full name for me?" "Lily Ann Calloway," she whispered. The middle of her voice rasped and disappeared. Elias felt something cold move through him. "Go to emergency if she has trouble lying flat tonight," he said. Mara swallowed. "Dr. Hale said if I keep bringing her in without clinical need, insurance may deny the transfer." "Transfer? They're sending us to a rehab facility after the donor event. He said it's the next step." Elias rose too quickly, and his knee gave a sharp complaint. A transfer after the event meant distance, delay, and fewer witnesses. It meant Lily could worsen under another team that would trust Hale's notes more than a mother's fear. "When is the paperwork?" "Next Friday, 1 week before the donor event." Mara's phone buzzed. She ignored it, then winced when it buzzed again. "It's billing," she said. "I'm behind on everything. If they mark me difficult, I don't know what happens to her care." That was why she could not simply walk away. Hale had wrapped his control in medicine, money, and fear. Elias reached for the old habit of certainty, then stopped. Confidence had ruined him once. It had made him believe truth would defend itself if written clearly enough in the right file. It would not. "Ask for copies of every discharge summary," he said. "Every instruction sheet. Keep them together." "Why?" "Because paper remembers what people deny." Mara studied his face. "You were more than useful, weren't you?" Elias did not answer. The next morning, Ryan Bell found him near the bus stop with a styrofoam cup of coffee someone had left half full. "Mr. Ward," Ryan said, making the name sound like a borrowed coat. "Doctor. Hale asked me to give you a courtesy warning." Elias kept both hands around the cup. Ryan unfolded a hospital letter. "You are not to approach St. Agnes patients, staff, donors, or visitors on hospital property. Any further interference may result in a trespass order." "May?" "Don't test the word." Elias read the letter without touching it. Hale had not signed it. A compliance officer had. That was how powerful men kept their fingerprints clean. Ryan lowered his voice. "Whatever you think you were, you're not that anymore." A bus sighed at the curb. 2 nurses passing by slowed just enough to hear. Elias said, "How low are you placing the incision?" Ryan's mouth tightened. "That's not your concern. It becomes my concern when a child can't speak properly. Lily Calloway is being treated by one of the best pediatric surgical teams in the Northwest." "No," Elias said. "She's being protected by her mother and ignored by yours." The remark hit deeper than he expected. Ryan's cheeks went red. "You know what people say about you?" Ryan said. "They say you were sued out of practice. They say you blamed everybody else and ended up exactly where men like that end up." Elias stared at the hospital letter. There it was again. The old story, trimmed and sharpened until it fit in someone else's mouth. A nurse across the walkway stopped pretending not to listen. It was Carla Ruiz, night shift, 15 years at St. Agnes, the one whose pen had paused near the conference door weeks later. Elias knew her only by sight, but Carla knew how doctors sounded when they were hiding behind rank. Ryan stepped closer. Stay away from the girl. Elias lifted his cup, took one sip of cold coffee, and said, "No." The word was quiet enough that Ryan almost missed it. Then Elias walked past him. That night, the city cleared the camp near the medical district. Tents came down under floodlights. Bags were tagged. People were told where they could stand, then told not there. Elias kept June's harmonica under his shirt and the bulletin page flat against his chest beneath 2 layers of clothing. When an outreach worker asked if he had documents, Elias said no. He had learned that certain papers only mattered when the right person saw them at the right time. By midnight, he was sleeping under the east side of the Morrison Bridge with his bag hooked through his arm. Rain tapped the concrete in uneven bursts. He dreamed of an operating room, June's hand on the glass, Hale young and eager beside him saying, "No one will remember who drew the first line." Elias woke with his pulse hammering. The dream had given him what memory had buried. The original operative note. Not the full file. Not a stack of records nobody would read. 1 page. 1 signed approval sheet from the first clinical case, filed with the county medical archive because St. Agnes had received public research funding that year, supporting proof, official proof, if it still existed. The next morning, Elias walked 3 miles to the Multnomah County Records Office. His shoes soaked through by the Burnside Bridge. A clerk at the counter hesitated when he asked for a public research grant attachment from 1998. "Do you have ID?" she asked. "Expired. Then I can't release certified copies. I don't need certified. You need a request number. I can fill out a request. You need an address." Elias gave the church basement. She almost refused. Then she saw the steadiness of his handwriting on the form. Not elegant, not showy, surgical. The clerk slid him a receipt with a pickup date. November 17th. 1 day before the donor event. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Outside, he found Mara waiting with Lily under the awning. Carla Ruiz stood with them in scrubs and a winter coat, her face tense. "I'm off shift," Carla said quickly. "I can't access anything I'm not assigned to." "I didn't ask you to," Elias said. Carla handed him a sealed envelope. "Then, don't tell me what you do with this." Inside was not a secret chart. It was a copy of the public brochure from Hale's education suite, the one donors had been allowed to take. On the back, the same diagram appeared with the red line too low and the corner initials covered by a logo. Mara's voice trembled. "He's using it at the event." Elias put the brochure beside his old bulletin page. One showed what Hale was claiming now. One showed what Elias had created then. The county record, if it came through, would confirm which story was true. Lily touched the harmonica hanging from his neck with one careful finger. "You should play it when you get scared," she whispered. Instead, he told the truth. "I'm scared all the time." Then play it quiet. He closed his hand around the silver edge. That was the moment he chose the reveal. Not in a hallway. Not in Hale's office. Not through a complaint that could be buried under policy language before lunch. At the donor event, in front of the trustees, cameras, residents, and the city official who had already started writing things down. Hale wanted a stage. Elias would let him have one, and if they dragged him out before he could speak, then the scar on his wrist would have to speak first. On the morning of November 17th, Elias arrived at the Multnomah County Records Office before it opened. His coat was still damp from sleeping behind the church. His shoes made small dark prints on the tile. People waiting for permits and marriage licenses gave him the same fast glance, then protected themselves with distance. At 9, the clerk from the week before called his name. She held a thin envelope. "I found one attachment," she said. "Public grant approval packet, Surgical Innovation Fund, 1998. It's not certified, but it's an official archive copy." Elias took it with both hands. Inside was a single page. Not dramatic, not pretty. A faxed approval sheet with old toner shadows and a county stamp in the corner. But there it was. the first funded clinical use of the Ward pathway at St. Agnes, Principal Investigator Dr. Elias Ward, witness signature from the medical review chair, and a diagram reference matching the old bulletin. One page that said he had not imagined his own life. The clerk watched his face change. "Sir," she asked, softer now, "is this for court?" Elias folded the page carefully and slid it into the blue cloth with the bulletin. For a child. By noon, Lily was back inside St. Agnes. Mara had brought her to emergency before sunrise because Lily could not lie flat without coughing. After 5 hours, a junior doctor said the scan showed post-operative changes and recommended observation. Hale overruled it from upstairs. The donor event needed Lily visible. Not all night. Not dangerously, he told Mara. Just 10 minutes near the front so donors could see the kind of child their money would help. After that, the transfer papers would be completed. Mara refused once. A hospital administrator appeared with Ryan Bell and reminded her that delayed transfer could affect insurance authorization. Ryan said it gently, which made it worse. By 4 o'clock, Mara called the number Carla had written on a napkin for Elias to reach the nurse's station. "He's making us go," Mara whispered. "He says if we don't cooperate, he'll document refusal of care." Elias stood in a laundromat near Powell Boulevard, holding the receiver with wet fingers. "Listen to me," he said. "Do not sign anything you haven't read." "I'm tired," Mara said, and that broke his heart more than if she had cried. "I'm so tired. I know. Are you coming?" Elias shut his eyes for 1 second. In the glass of the washing machine he could see himself. Old coat, hollow cheeks, beard uneven from a shelter razor. Nothing about him looked like rescue. "Yes," he said. That evening, the conference room had been transformed. White flowers on tall stands, silver programs on every chair. A blue-lit screen with Victor Hale's name glowing above the diagram. Donors moved in soft fabrics and expensive shoes while residents practiced laughter in small clusters near the coffee urns. Elias entered through a side door used by catering staff. Carla had not opened it for him. She had simply made sure it did not lock all the way after a supply delivery. That was as much risk as she could take. He wore the only clean shirt he owned under his coat. Around his neck hung a temporary visitor badge Mara had signed out for him under the name Family Support. The harmonica rested beneath it, silver against cardboard. For 7 minutes, no one noticed him. He stood near the back and listened while Hale praised innovation, community care, and the courage of families who trust science. On the screen behind him, the red incision line sat too low. Lily was beside Mara in the front row, sitting too still. Then Hale invited Ryan Bell to speak. Ryan stepped to the microphone with that eager, polished face. "One of the dangers in medicine today," he said, "is misinformation. Families are vulnerable. They hear confident voices from unqualified people, and suddenly fear becomes louder than expertise." A few residents nodded. Elias felt every word land where Ryan intended. Mara's shoulders tightened. Ryan continued, "That is why leadership matters. That is why Dr. Hale's work matters. Standards protect patients from guesswork." Lily coughed. This time, several donors heard it. Elias moved before he planned to, not toward Hale. Toward the aisle where Mara could see him. He said only 5 words. "That incision is too low." The room stalled. Hale recovered quickly, made a joke, and the young resident laughed. Mara defended Elias. Hale warned her about Lily's transfer. Security came. The badge was snatched and held up like proof of shame. The room saw the homeless man before it saw the surgeon. It all happened in less than 2 minutes. But this time, Elias knew what was coming next. Hale did not just want him removed. He wanted him erased in front of everyone. "Bring the lights up," Hale said. The conference room brightened until every stain on Elias's coat became visible. Hale stood on the platform with the microphone loose in his hand. "Before we proceed, I think transparency is important. This individual has been harassing patients for weeks. He has no role here, no current license, and according to our compliance notes, a history of unstable behavior around this institution." Mara rose. "That's not true." Hale ignored her. "Mrs. Calloway, sit down." The sharpness in his voice made Lily flinch. Elias's hand closed around the blue cloth inside his coat. Ryan Bell took one step into the aisle. "Sir, you need to leave." "Not yet." 2 words, too calm for the script Hale wanted. Hale's smile disappeared. "Then, let's be clear," he said. "If you continue interfering with care, I will recommend that Mrs. Calloway's refusal and your influence be documented in the transfer file. That record follows patients. It affects future decisions." Mara's face drained. That was the sacred thing. Not Elias's pride, not his old career, not his name. Lily's future. Elias could take another public beating. He had survived worse in quieter rooms, but he would not let Hale turn a mother's fear into a medical stain on a child. He pulled the folded archive page from inside the blue cloth. Ryan saw the movement and reached for it. Elias moved the paper behind his back. The guard tightened his grip on Elias's arm. "Open his bag," Hale said. Carla Ruiz, standing near the side wall in her coat, said, "You can't search his property in front of donors." Haley's eyes snapped toward her. "Nurse Ruiz, you are off duty." "And still a witness." A chair scraped in the second row. Denise Harper had stood up. "Dr. Hale," she said, "as the city health representative present for this event, I'd advise against confiscating anything from a visitor without clear cause." Hale adjusted instantly. "Of course, no one is confiscating anything." Then he nodded at Ryan. Ryan leaned close enough that only Elias could hear him. "You think a dirty piece of paper changes what you are?" Elias did not answer, because Ryan was not the person he had come to reach. Lily was. The girl was watching his hand, the one with the scar. Her breathing had shortened again. Her fingers pressed against the blanket, hard. Elias spoke over Ryan's shoulder. "Lily, if your throat tightens, raise your right hand." Mara covered her mouth. Hale's voice cracked through the microphone. "Do not give clinical instructions to my patient. She is in distress. She is anxious because you are frightening her." Elias shook his head once. "No. She is compensating." The word landed strangely in the room, too precise to come from the man they thought they were seeing. Hale heard it. So did Carla. Ryan tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Now he's teaching physiology." Lily's right hand lifted. Not high, just above the blanket. Mara bent over her. "Baby." The cough came again, wet and shallow. This time, Lily could not finish it. Carla moved first. She crossed the room and checked Lily's color. Elias stayed where he was, because if he rushed forward, Hale would call it assault before anyone called it care. "Her airway needs evaluation," Carla said. Hale's control slipped. She was cleared this afternoon. "By you?" Harper asked. The microphone caught the question. A donor lowered his phone. Another raised one. Haley pointed toward the doors. "Get him out now." The guard pulled Elias hard enough that the harmonica snapped from under the visitor badge and struck the marble. A clean, metallic note rang through the room. June's harmonica slid across the floor and stopped beside Lily's wheelchair. Lily reached down with a shaking hand and picked it up. "No," she whispered. Her voice was almost gone, but the word carried. Elias stopped struggling. Every eye followed the small, silver object in the child's hand. Hale tried to speak, but Denise Harper had already walked into the aisle. Her phone was recording now, held openly at chest height. "Mr. Ward," she said, "you said the incision was too low. Do you have a basis for that statement?" Ryan's face hardened. Hale said, "Do not answer that." Elias slowly pulled his wrist free enough to roll back his sleeve. The scar appeared under the bright conference lights. Old, clean, deliberate. Carla's breath caught audibly. Denise Harper lowered the phone a fraction, not from doubt but recognition that something had just crossed from disruption into evidence. Elias held up the folded page. "Yes," he said, "I have a basis." And for the first time all evening, Victor Hale had no line ready. Hale found his voice by turning contempt into a weapon. "A scar is not a credential," he said. "The line should have worked. It was clean, dismissive, and easy for nervous people to accept." Several residents shifted as if waiting for permission to laugh again. No one did. Elias kept his sleeve raised. "You're right," he said. "A scar is not a credential." That calm agreement unsettled Hale more than resistance would have. Denise Harper took 2 measured steps closer, phone still recording. "Then explain what it is." Elias glanced at Lily first. Carla had one hand near the girl's shoulder, monitoring her breathing while Mara knelt beside the wheelchair. Lily still held June's harmonica, her fingers curled around the dented corner as if it were the only solid thing in the room. "This scar," Elias said, "came from the first controlled demonstration of the pathway shown on that screen." Ryan Bell gave a short laugh, too late and too forced. "That's absurd." Elias did not raise his voice. The original pathway required a higher entry point to protect the nerve bundle and preserve airway clearance. The line on Dr. Hale's slide is lower. That change can trap swelling where a child has the least room for error. Carla's face tightened. "That explains the voice change." Hale snapped, "Nurse Ruiz, you are not part of this presentation." "No," Carla said. "I'm part of her care." The sentence cut through the room. A trustee in the front row leaned toward another and whispered. A donor with a silver watch stopped filming Hale and aimed his phone at the screen. The residents had gone still, caught between ambition and the sudden fear of having laughed at the wrong man. Hale pointed toward Elias's paper. "He has rehearsed this. Anyone can invent technical language." "Then let someone qualified review it," Mara said. Hale's eyes flashed toward her. "You are endangering your daughter by encouraging this interruption." Elias lowered his sleeve and unfolded the bulletin page. "This is not the official record," he said. "This is the human one." He held it up so the front row could see the old black-and-white photograph. A younger Elias in a surgical cap, sleeve rolled, scar fresh beneath a bandage edge, standing beside the original diagram. For a moment, the room did not understand. Then Harper did. She moved beside him and read the caption aloud, careful and slow. "Dr. Elias Ward demonstrates the Ward pathway after successful clinical approval." The name entered the room like a door opening. Mara covered her mouth. Ryan's lips parted, but no sound came out. Carla stared from the photograph to Elias's wrist, then to the diagram on Hale's screen. She had worked long enough in hospitals to know when a buried history was standing upright in front of her. Hale recovered with a hard breath. "That bulletin is decades old," he said. "A historical curiosity. Medicine evolves. Dr. Ward left under serious ethical concerns." Elias folded the page once, protecting the crease with his thumb. "Yes," he said, "after you accused me." The words were quiet, but they reached every chair. Ryan looked at Hale. That was the first crack. Not public outrage, not a gasp. Just one young doctor checking the face of the man he had copied for years. Hale's hand tightened around the microphone. "This is defamatory." "Then let the record answer it." Elias took out the second page. The county archive copy was plain enough to disappoint anyone expecting drama. Old fax marks, a county stamp, a grant attachment number in the corner, but Elias held it like something alive. "This is the public research grant approval from 1998, he said. 1 page. St. Agnes received public money to develop the pathway. Principal investigator, Dr. Elias Ward, witnessed by the medical review chair. Diagram reference matches the page Dr. Hale used tonight. Harper reached for it. "May I?" Elias handed it to her. That was his choice, not to clutch the proof like a wounded man guarding pride, but to let the room test it. Harper read silently first. Her expression changed only once when she reached the principal investigator line. Then she faced the trustees. "This appears to be an official county archive copy. I'm requesting that the hospital preserve all materials related to tonight's donor event and the pathway presentation." Hale moved fast. Denise, this is outside the scope of your attendance. Dr. Hale, Harper said, I'm here because the hospital tied this event to community benefit funding. A child patient is present, a clinical warning has been raised, and an authorship and safety concern now involves a publicly funded project. The donors heard the phrase, publicly funded. So did the hospital attorney, who had been standing near the side wall since Harper's first question. His face had taken on the careful blankness of a man watching liability acquire witnesses. Hale stepped down from the platform. Enough, he said. Mr. Ward is an embittered former physician with an agenda. The family is frightened. Nurse Ruiz is overstepping, and this entire performance is compromising a patient's emotional stability. Lily raised the harmonica slightly. I'm not scared of him, she whispered. The smallness of her voice did what Elias's credentials could not. It made the lie visible. Mara stood. I want another surgeon to evaluate my daughter. Tonight, Hale said. That is not medically indicated. Carla answered before Mara could. Her voice is fading, her cough changed, and she raised her hand when asked about tightness. That is enough for escalation. Ryan Bell stared at Lily, then at the slide. His face had lost its shine. Elias saw the moment happening and knew it could still be stolen. A powerful man could turn any room back toward procedure if no one placed a boundary in the floor. So Elias walked to the front. The guard reached for him, but Harper lifted one hand. Let him speak. Elias stopped beneath Hale's slide. The red incision line glowed over his shoulder like an accusation drawn in light. He faced the residents first. You are allowed to be ambitious, he said. You are not allowed to stop listening. Ryan's eyes dropped, then Elias faced Hale. You can keep my name, he said. But you don't get the child. That was the line. Short, calm, final. Hale's expression broke. Not into guilt, into panic. He reached for the laptop on the podium. The slide vanished. The screen went blue. A murmur spread through the donors. Harper said, Please step away from the computer. The hospital attorney crossed the room now. Dr. Hale, do not alter any presentation materials. I'm ending a disrupted event, Hale snapped. You're preserving evidence, the attorney said, and the way he said it made clear the hospital's loyalty had started moving away from its favorite surgeon. Mara had already turned Lily's chair toward the exit. Carla walked with them. Emergency department, she said. Now. I'll page the on-call ENT myself. Hale blocked the aisle for half a second. Elias did not touch him. He only held his gaze. Hale moved. That tiny retreat was the first consequence anyone could see. The larger ones began before the room emptied. The trustee chair announced that donor pledges connected to the pathway would be paused pending review. Harper formally requested preservation of event recordings, printed materials, and patient transfer documents. The hospital attorney instructed security not to remove Elias and asked 2 staff members to collect names of witnesses who had heard Hale threaten Mara's transfer record. No one was arrested. No one was instantly ruined. But the machinery Hale had used to protect himself had turned its gears in another direction. Ryan Bell remained beside the front row, holding his program with both hands. The laugh he had offered so easily at the start of the night now seemed to embarrass him physically. He approached Elias when Hale was pulled into a tight conversation with the attorney. I didn't know, Ryan said. Elias slid the bulletin page back into the blue cloth. You didn't ask. Ryan swallowed. There was no cruelty in the answer. That made it harder to escape. Doc. Elias turned. She held up the harmonica. He walked over and took it from her small hand. You keep breathing, he said. You keep that, she whispered. Then the doors parted, and medical urgency replaced theater. Elias stood alone under the blue screen with the silver harmonica in his palm, the scar uncovered, the county page safe against his chest. Behind him, Victor Hale was no longer speaking into a microphone. He was answering questions. Lily was examined that night by a surgeon who had not trained under Victor Hale. The swelling was real. The airway risk was real. The incision placement had made the complication harder to recognize and easier to dismiss. By morning, Lily was in monitored care with a corrected treatment plan, and Mara was asleep in a chair with one hand still wrapped around her daughter's blanket. Elias did not sleep. He sat in the emergency waiting area with June's harmonica in his coat pocket and the county page inside a hospital envelope Denise Harper had given him. No one asked him to leave. No one offered him a room either. Change, like medicine, did not work instantly just because people finally admitted something was wrong. But at dawn, Carla Ruiz brought him coffee in a paper cup. "Fresh," she said. Elias accepted it with both hands. "That's new." Carla sat beside him, still in yesterday's clothes. The board opened an emergency review. "Outside counsel is coming in today. Hale's cases are being reassigned until they know what they're dealing with." Elias nodded. He had imagined those words for years and discovered they did not sound like victory. They sounded like a door unlocking in an empty house. "What about Lily?" he asked. "Stable, scared, breathing easier." That was the only part that mattered. By the end of the week, St. Agnes froze all donor funding tied to the pathway. The hospital removed Hale's presentation from its website and issued a statement about a formal review into patient safety concerns and historical attribution. They did not use the word stolen. Institutions rarely start with the cleanest word, but they suspended Victor Hale's surgical privileges pending review. Ryan Bell and the other residents were interviewed about the donor event, the public threat to Mara's transfer file, and the warnings they had ignored. Carla gave a statement. Harper submitted her recording and the county archive copy. Mara was given independent patient advocacy support, legal guidance, and written assurance that Lily's care would not be affected by her questions. The transfer note Hale had threatened was never entered. 2 weeks later, Lily went home. Not healed all at once, not running through a hallway like a miracle commercial. She moved slowly, with follow-up visits and a voice that still tired if she talked too long. But she was alive, and her mother was no longer being treated like fear made her foolish. On the first dry Saturday in December, Mara found Elias outside the church basement, where he sometimes helped serve breakfast. He was repairing the wheel on a donated walker with a butter knife and patience. Lily was beside her, wrapped in a red scarf, holding a paper bag. "You're hard to find," Mara said. Elias tightened one screw. "Only when people are looking for the wrong thing." Lily reached into the bag and pulled out a small wooden case. "My grandpa made it," she said, "for your harmonica." Elias took it carefully. The case was simple, sanded smooth, with a crooked little latch. On top, Lily had painted one word in blue letters. June. For a moment, Elias could not speak. Mara filled the quiet. She said everything important should have a name. Elias ran his thumb over the paint. The old silver instrument had spent years wrapped in cloth like a wound. Now it had a place to rest. "Thank you," he said. Lily smiled. "You can play it quiet." He did. Just one note. Thin, imperfect, and trembling in the cold air. A month later, the review's first findings became public. Hale had used modified teaching materials without proper attribution, failed to disclose changes to the original pathway clearly in donor materials, and created an environment where staff concerns were discouraged. The medical board opened its own inquiry. St. Agnes kept his privileges suspended, and by spring, his resignation was announced in language polished enough to hide the damage. But everyone in the building understood. He had not lost everything in one dramatic moment. He had lost the thing he valued most, control of the story. Elias did not return to surgery. His hands were older now, and he knew the difference between restoration and pretending time could be reversed. Instead, St. Agnes, under pressure from Harper's office and its own trustees, created a patient listening program named for No Donor and No Celebrity Doctor. Elias refused a ceremonial title. He accepted a small consulting role, a housing voucher through a medical outreach partnership, and access to care for the wrists that ached whenever rain moved in. His apartment was modest. One room, a narrow kitchen, a view of a brick wall that caught morning light. To Elias, it felt enormous. On his first night there, he placed June's harmonica case on the windowsill. Beside it, he set a framed copy of the old bulletin photograph. Not because he needed visitors to know who he had been. Most days, he still preferred not to explain. He kept it there because a life can be taken apart by silence and rebuilt by one person choosing not to stay erased. In April, Lily visited with Mara after a checkup. Her voice was stronger. She brought a small card from her class. Inside, in many different colors, children had written thank you notes to Doc Elias, though most of them had no idea what he had done. One child had drawn a man with a silver harmonica standing beside a hospital taller than the sun. Elias taped it to the refrigerator. Mara noticed the county page on the table, still in its protective sleeve. "Are you going to frame that too?" she asked. Elias thought about it. Then he shook his head. That one did its job. He placed it in a drawer. The harmonica stayed in the light. Some evenings, when the rain softened the city and traffic hissed along the pavement below, Elias opened the wooden case and played one quiet note. Not for the hospital, not for Victor Hale, not even for the years he lost. For June, for Lily, for every person who had been told their pain was an inconvenience until someone finally listened. And if this story made you wonder how many quiet warnings get ignored because they come from the wrong kind of person, tell me in the comments. Would you have believed Elias before the scar was shown? Subscribe for more stories about dignity, justice, and the truth that waits longer than cruelty can stand.